Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our presentation today. I know this is the last session of the symposium, so we will make it lively and energetic. So first, we'd like to start with our own introductions to let you know who we are and why we are up here presenting to you all today. My name is Elyse Werling, and I am the Director of Interpretation and Collections for Preservation Virginia. I'll talk a little bit more about Preservation Virginia, but next we have Faith.
Hi, my name is Faith Page. I'm a junior here at William & Mary. I'm studying history. I was part of the Woody internship program in the summer of 2024. While that internship is only 10 weeks and my internship has ended, I've continued working with Preservation Virginia around this year just to do different tours and a Black History Month event and things like that. And I'm here today to present on my research.
My name is James Harrison, and I've done genealogical work among families along Graves Creek, where the Smith Fort plantation is located. And I think they just need somebody of this generation to sit at the table.
He's our community member, and he's very important to this. All righty, so. Okay, we're gonna have to click through manually. All right, so first I'll talk a little bit about Preservation Virginia as an organization. You may or may not be familiar with us. You may be familiar with our previous name, which was the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities. And I think we can all agree Preservation Virginia is a better option in this day and age. We were founded in 1899, actually it's 1889, and we are the nation's oldest statewide preservation organization. So our first site was in fact Jamestown, where the fort site is, and we still own and operate that site today. Many of you may have been there, especially if you're from this area. But we have 5 other sites as well, and I serve as Director of Museums and Curator for the 5 other sites. So that would be the John Marshall House in Richmond, Virginia, the Cape Henry Lighthouse, which is in Virginia Beach, and click. Then we have Patrick Henry's Scotchtown, which is in Hanover County. It's a big year for Patrick Henry. In fact, tomorrow is the 250th anniversary of his Give Me Liberty speech. We also own in Surry County, Smith's Fort and Bacon's Castle. So you also hopefully have heard of one of the or 2 of those. But today we're going to focus on Smith's Fort. But first, a little just touching on Surry. If you haven't been to Surry, please hop the ferry right at Jamestown and take it over. It's a free ferry ride. Yes, next slide. You can see here is our little map. And it's a wonderful place. And I've come to just love working there with the people, with the history that's in Surry. It's so rich in history and cultural resources and people who truly care about their community. And so you can see there's Jamestown right across the river, Smith's Fort, where we're talking about today. Surry is the town as well as the county, and then just down the road is Bacon's Castle. So Smith's Fort, yes. Smith's Fort, we'll also refer to it as Graves Creek Farm today, because that is what the families who owned it from 1886 to 1930 called it. So it has 2 parts to it, really. The back part on the river actually has archaeological remains of John Smith's 1609 fallback fort from Jamestown. So there's a bit of a hill in the earth, and then a little bit of a dip where a moat was, and this is a fort that was never actually completed. because the starving times set in and they retreated back to Jamestown. They never finished that fort, but the archaeology of it still remains today. So to the early APVA ladies, that is why was so important to them, this place. At one point, the land was owned by Thomas Rolfe, the son of Pocahontas and John Rolfe. And what exactly he was doing there is a little bit ambiguous just because it was 400 years ago, but we do believe there was probably tobacco production. Whether he was there or not is, again, we're not sure, because he would have probably maybe taken over at a very young age and somebody would have been operating that land in his place, because for centuries and centuries and centuries before and during this time, the Powhatan chiefdom was primarily the people in this land. And we fully acknowledge that all of our tribal partners are still very active and present in the area today. In fact, the Nottoway Powwow is still held in Surry every year and is a wonderful event to go to if you have not been before. So moving forward, past Thomas Rolfe, through the 18th century, we've got a number of upper middle class owners of this property. And in about 1765, this brick house that you see here was constructed. For many years, people believed that the brick house was built in 1650. A little dating sampling of the wood in the 90s really debunked that. So we got that 1765 date. So that is the physical house structure we're going to talk about today. And then moving forward into the 19th century, in 1886, 4 Black families purchased this property. And they have been the subject of base research and really what our internship partnership with the Woody program has been over the past few years. So by the 1920s, only one of those men is the sole owner of that property, and his name is Bolling Morris. Through the channels of a certain somebody here in Williamsburg, W.A.R. Goodwin, if you're familiar with the founding of colonial Williamsburg, you know that name. He acted as Rockefeller's agent, going around Williamsburg and purchasing properties. Well, he also was working to purchase properties in Surry, and for reasons that Faith will get into, he ends up, through his agents, coercing Bolling Morris into selling him this property, and then it is transferred to the APVA. So we'll get further into that because it is confusing. But that's a very basic timeline of the people and the players that we're going to talk about today. So for many years at Smith's Fort, if you were to come and take a tour, our interpretation has centered on the 17th and 18th century white history of the site, with a very heavy romanticized focus on the false idea of Pocahontas' dowry, her husband John Rolfe, and her son Thomas Rolfe. But including the story of Bolling Morris, John Hardy, Carter Hardy, and Robertson Simmons is a compelling and relevant narrative necessary for understanding the complete history of this amazing site. So here's just a couple of closer views of the house that we're going to talk about today. As an organization, our research into this Reconstruction era history of this site did not begin until very recently. We always knew that these families had owned this land, and it really wasn't until 2019, before I even worked here, that somebody started looking into Bolling Morris. Who was he? You know, what happened to him after the APVA took over this property, etc. In 2022, we sort of launched into the partnership with the Woody internship program here at William and Mary, and our first intern was in the summer of 2023. Sterling Hodge sort of began diving into trying to figure out more about these families that were living on this property. And then in 2024, Faith here, took on the internship, and I will then pass over the baton to her to tell you about what she found.
Hi, everyone. So in approaching this research, I'd never done a research project in this way before, but I really set off wanting to know more about their personal lives, how these four men came to know each other, how they were related, why they chose the specific property. And as far as their personal lives, there are a couple holes in that, honestly, just because of where you're able to research African-American history. We really only have personal letters for a couple of historical figures, and that's not the case with every person you're going to research. So as I found so many different things in the Surry courthouse, documents there aren't going to talk about the feelings and emotions of different people. So that's certainly something we're looking forward to finding later. I am going to actually begin with the timeline. If we could go to that slide, thank you. This first slide is really just the preliminary timeline before we actually get to those four African-American men and their families. So in 1608, John Smith founds this fort on the edge of what is now Smith's Fort Plantation. And that's the namesake, obviously, for the site. And then in 1614, John Rolfe, who's the husband of Pocahontas, acquires the land. There's some debate over this just because a lot of people thought that it was a dowry gift. We now know that just based on the historical context of their tribe, that wasn't really something that they commonly did. So we don't believe that it was a dowry gift. In 1619, the first slave ships arrive in British North America at Point Comfort. And that'll come into play in the importance of the story a bit later. In 1622, John Rolfe passes away. He leaves the property under the care of Thomas Pierce, who is the father-in-law he inherits after his third wife to Joanne, which is after Pocahontas passes away. So Thomas Pierce is the one who's taking care of this land between 1622 and 1635, because the son, Thomas Rolfe, again, the son of John and Pocahontas, is very young. I think he's about 7 years old at that point. So in 1624, Angela, who's one of the first enslaved Africans to arrive in British North America, is listed on the census as being enslaved by Thomas Pierce. So we know him to be related to the slave trade, the very early remnants of that in British North America. In 1635, we have Thomas Rolfe returning to Smith's Fort. He's been away in England. He does return at some point. He takes responsibility from Pierce. We can go to the next slide. So then in 1627, we have Robertson Simmons and John Hardy being born. So these four African-American men are Robertson Simmons, John Hardy, Carter Hardy, their father and son, and then Bolling Morris Sr. It's a little bit funny. Bolling Morris Sr. is actually a junior. His father is Bolling Morris, but he's listed as Bolling Morris Sr. because he names his son Bolling Morris. So we're going to refer to him as Bolling Morris Sr. He's sort of the focus of many parts of these stories. In 1857, we have Carter Hardy being born, and then in 1860, Bolling Morris Sr. is born. So in 1896, these four men purchased Grace Creek, Smith's Fort. They refer to it as Grace Creek, and in legal documents, it's referred to as Grace Creek. So that's why we use that terminology today. They buy 521 acres and the house for $2,500. Don't we wish that we could be buying houses and land for $2,500? But they purchased that property. They buy it from the Spratlys, Stith and Mamie Spratley. In 1914, there is actually a lawsuit. We're not quite sure why, but Bolling Morris Sr. and Ella Morris are sued by Ida Hardy and Carter Hardy for that land. This results in only Bolling Morris, from those four original men owning the property. We're not quite sure what prompted that. In 1923, we have Ella E. Morris, who's the wife of Bolling Morris Sr. And the mother of Bolling Morris Jr. She passes away. And then in 1827, Bolling Morris Sr. remarries to Josephine Morris, who has children from a previous marriage. And then our next slide. In 1928, the house is sold under odd pretenses to W.A.R. Goodwin, and the Morris family secures a loan from W.A.R. Goodwin and A.W. Homes, and that's for $9,000. In 1931, we have an inventory taken from Bolling Morris Sr. At this point, he actually isn't living in the house, but it is an inventory for things around the time he sold the house, so we can make the assumption that these things would have lived in the house at a certain point. And this is, again, something I'm finding in the Surry courthouse. So this year is also when the Morris family is unable to pay their loan, and the remaining land goes up for public auction. It's purchased by A.W. Homes and the National Ideal Benefit Society that I'll talk a little bit more about later. In 1932, Bolling Morris Sr. dies. He's been sick for a little while. Josephine Morris writes to W. Era Goodwin around this time in hopes of opening up the house for Garden Week. At this point, the house has been sold, but the Morris family is living around that area, and they can actually see the house from wherever it is they're living. And this is, according to her, based on other inquiries she's had. People have asked if the house is going to be put up for Garden Week because apparently that was a tradition of theirs. This request is denied. You'll see throughout the story that W. R. Goodwin is not exactly a friend of the Morris family. 1934, we have the first mention of Bolling Morris Jr. being in prison. This is one of the sort of holes in the story, something we'd love to be able to explore more. We're not exactly sure why Bolling Morris Jr. goes to prison, and it doesn't seem to be for a straightforward reason. And then 1938, Bolling Morris Jr., we assume, is just getting out of prison, and he immediately sues A.W. Holmes and Jake Jones, claiming that an illegal sale was made. And this is why it's sort of muddled, just because this time is when his father passes away and this land is sort of sold out from under him. And looking at the ledger books in the Surry courthouse, the physical documents that these men were being portrayed in, we have Bolling Morris Sr. time and time again listed year after year as owning this property, both Grays Creek that we're talking about and Oak Hills as well. And then he sort of disappears and the land disappears, and it's not going to Bolling Morris Jr. at all. It just sort of slips out of the record. So we would love to research that in coming summers. Great. So with a title like Smith's Ford Plantation, it's easy to acknowledge the fact that it was a plantation and there would have been African-American people living on this land as slaves. But as we did find out that in 1886, these 4 African men purchased the property, it's really important to look at their legacy on the property, especially as they are the last family to own it before the APVA comes in, along with Rockefeller and W. R. Goodwin and men like that. It's been named many different things. It's gone by Smith's Fort, Grays Creek, Smith's Fort Plantation, Rolfs Creek, the Warren House, and all of these names are really acknowledging the white history there, and not necessarily looking at the Black people who also own this land, just as others did. So my research was focused on reinterpreting the house to include a more complete narrative and make sure that these African American families are being noticed and discussed in the same way that everyone else is. So we talked a little bit about that preliminary history, the dowry idea and everything like that. When William Pierce comes in 1622, and again, that's John Rolfe's father-in-law, he's taking care of it from 1622 to 1635. And there's no documentation as to how Pierce might have inhabited this land, what exactly he was doing. We do know that during this time, different patents were taken out by other white men. And again, this is when Thomas is over in England. So we know that Pierce is very early on a slave owner. He is listed as having owned Angela of the treasurer in the 1624 and 1625 census. He's also one of the 3 men who's told by Governor George Yardley to meet the first slave ship in 1619. So we think that he may have, brought enslaved people at some point to that land as he was a caretaker for a few years. Then Thomas comes back. He continues the patents that were taken out during the time that he was in England. And we're, again, as Elyse said, we're not quite sure how he might have used that land. I do want to acknowledge at this point that plantation is common verbiage in American history, but it actually refers to 20 or more enslaved people working in an area. So it's a farm, technically, if it's 19 or less. We are officially referring to this as a plantation because we have different documentation where one enslaver is holding 20 or more slaves. So one example of this is Mary Spratley in the 19th century. She has 24 enslaved people listed. She's one of the few people we know the most about the people she actually enslaved, and that's really just their names and possibly their relation to each other, but it's 24 people listed there. And again, the Spratleys are actually going to be the people who end up selling it to those 4 African-American men. So in 1886, they purchased the land. We don't really know how they lived before that. We have Robertson Simmons and Bolling Morris's father, who might have been enslaved. We really just have short little notes as far as that. We have a list of runaway slaves that Bolling Morris Sr.'s father is potentially listed on, but again, it's just one page. And then we have this payroll of slaves employed by the Commonwealth that lists of Robertson Simmons, and just because that's not a super common name, that may have been him. The other four men weren't born in a time that the other two men, Carter Hardy and Bolling Morris Sr., who are the same age, we don't think would have been enslaved. What we do know is John Hardy has a daughter, Ella E. Hardy, and she is obviously the sister of Carter Hardy, and she marries Bolling Morris Sr. So we know those three men are connected through marriage. Robertson Simmons is sort of the elusive figure in this. We don't know very much about him. We know that he was born in 1827. We know that he purchased this land with the other three men. We know that he was married twice, and we don't really know anything else. We don't know when he passed away or anything like that. We do know that by 1614, when there's that lawsuit between the Hardys and the Morrises, he's not mentioned at all. So at some point, he's either passed away or he's sold his shares or something like that. So you won't really hear much about him with the rest of the history. So I also really wanted to learn about their personal histories just to be able to understand how they might have lived in the house. And while I didn't get any personal letters or anything like that, we have a lot of really wonderful descendant testimony. We know that people who descended from Bolling Morris Sr. actually live in New Jersey. And they were actually in contact with you and were in contact at some point with Tom Forehand, who runs the site. And so we do know that through these photographs, certain rooms were used as bedrooms or family rooms, things like that. And she's sort of clicking through that right now. Those photos were actually taken in 1926 by a photographer who just walked through, colonial areas or historical homes in Virginia and took photos. And we're just sort of lucky that he happened to come to the Morris family's home. And we're actually able to find these photos in the Rockefeller Library. A lot of these correspondences and photos sort of came in the last hour for me in the last couple of weeks of my research. So that was really wonderful. As far as one of the rooms, we know that it was used as a bedroom because of these photos, but through descendant testimony, we also know that at some point it was used as a dining area while the four families lived there together. We had a sort of matriarch of the family come through in the 2010s, I think maybe 2014. And she said that there was a little patch in the drawers in the dining area that would never be quite dry. And she wondered if it was still there. And it's true, it's very tacky. It's been many, many, many years and it's still that way no matter what. And that's because her grandmother put the butter dish in that area and it never dried. And it just is a sort of physical remnant of the fact that they lived in that house, which I always think is very nice. I like to point that out on the tours I give. So I wanted to point it out here. One more note on Robertson Simmons. He married Laura Brown, and then he marries Melinda after Laura Brown passes away in 1886, the same year they purchased the home, and she dies of consumption. Melinda has two daughters, Belle Winfield, Antoinette Winfield, and Blanche Simmons, and two sons, Samuel and Joseph Simmons. And she has them with Robertson Simmons. So I want to reiterate that the house is built in the 1750s. I mentioned earlier that at one point the land was called the Warren House. That's because of a bit of a confusion that Elyse mentioned earlier, but it is built in 1756 by either Nicholas or 65 by either Nicholas or Jacob Falcon. They were the family that lived in the house at the time. It consists of 4 rooms across 2 floors, and then there's also a cellar. And I'll talk a little bit more about the garden and farm space a little later. If we could go to the inventory. So the 1931 inventory, I just wanted to bring up that image because it was one of the most exciting pieces that I found in my research. So I just pulled out a couple of key items. We have the equity in Grays Creek Farm, 298 acres at $500, equity in Oak Hill Farm, which is 100 acres, 2 peanut planters. They were peanut farmers, which is very common for African-American men of the time who had land. And then 2 brown mules named Kate and Rhoda, and 25 bags of seed peanuts at $2 each, and then 1 cook stove. So the cook stove would have resided in the kitchen. This was actually a room that these 4 men added to the house. And they are the only ones who ever used it because in 1928, it is immediately torn down. So as you can sort of see in that photo, it's not quite to the same standard as the rest of the house, and it's sort of in disrepair. So there's the change of ownership in the 1913 to 14 legal dispute. And then after that, we sort of enter the APVA. So at that point in the early 20th century, we have Preservation of Virginia being run as different associations with ladies of the area running them. So the one in Surry is named after Rolfe. So obviously they have a vested interest in the property. They believe at that time that Thomas Rolfe would have visited or been around that area at some point in that physical house. We now know that that wouldn't have been the case. It's about 100 years too late, but at the time they believed that that was his house, and they really thought that it was important that they purchase that land. So again, according to a lot of different correspondences and official letters from the Rockefeller Library, we know that they had an interest in purchasing this property as early as 1923. We also know that they couldn't afford it. So they actually owned quite a few other properties, notably in Williamsburg, which at this point is very interesting to Rockefeller. So they don't have the funds to buy the Bolling Morris house. Bolling Morris is currently living in the house and may or may not be interested in selling at the time of 1923, but they are making their interest known. So as Elyse mentioned, W. Goodwin is hired as an agent by Rockefeller. Rockefeller doesn't have any ties to Williamsburg. He certainly doesn't have any ties to the more rural Surry. So he's using W. Goodwin, who knows of Bolling Morris, doesn't have a personal relationship. And W. Goodwin is also using his own son, Rutherford. They're also going to talk to Meriwether Armistead, who's a lawyer in Surry. So by the 1920s, Rockefeller has sort of made a note that the APVA really wants that land, and they own the jail sites and the Capitol site in Williamsburg. And so he kind of wants to purchase this land so that he can make a trade and have a complete Williamsburg. That's his interest in this. And while W. Goodwin is, of course, being paid as an agent, we also find out that he has his own interest and to why he no longer wants Negroes inhabiting the home. So we have different letters where he's writing to the Morris family, and he knows of Bolling Morris, and he's semi-respectful in those letters. And then in letters about him, he calls Bolling Morris the Negro repeatedly, and he admits to different people that he has no plan for the house. He just wants to spare the government from having Negroes in the home. So that's his personal passion behind this project. At one point, he inquires to Josephine, Bolling Morris's second wife, if old Bolling is doing well, different things like that. And then we see later in different letters at the same time that he's not really meaning that. This mask sort of slips when Goodwin's son, Rutherford, actually gets quite impatient, and he goes to the Morris house. And at this point in time, Bolling Morris was out in the field farming, and Rutherford, this is of his own admission, says that he chases Bolling Morris through his own field with the deed, trying to scare him into signing it. So getting very dramatic, getting very desperate at this point. So in 1929, W. Eric Goodwin writes a note to Mr. Harrison Dimmitt of the Williamsburg Holding Corporation. And this is when he reveals a plan they have to trick Bolling Morris into selling the property. So it seems for whatever reason, Bolling Morris is okay with the APVA taking control of it. So they meet a Mrs. Lightfoot, and they have her, she's a part of the APVA of that branch. They have her pretend that they have gained the money to buy the property. And then in W. Eric Goodwin's own words, when Bolling Morris, the Negro, found that I was back of it, he used every possible effort to worm out of the agreement to sell. So it's clear that Bolling Morris Sr. knows that W. Eric Goodwin is not the kind of guy he wants to sell to. Not clear if he knows that Rockefeller is behind this or what's going on there. But there's another sort of plan to foil him there. So eventually, just because they know that Bolling Morris Sr. is struggling financially at this point, Bolling Morris Sr. had sold some of the bricks, not a significant amount. He sold some of the bricks of his home because he does know it to be a historical home. So there are some tourists coming in to Surry, and he sold them, I think, for $5 a brick. Was that what it was? Which is, significant money back then. And a lot of different parties in this, the APVA, W. Eric Goodwin, Rockefeller, get scared that he's going to sell the entire house away. And there's rumors that he might sell the walls and the home and things like that. Don't have any proof that that was necessarily his plan, but that's a fear. And it's something they discuss in their letters. So because of this stress, both parties, the Morris family is trying to solve their financial issues, and then the people trying to buy the house are trying to capitalize that. There's a loan secured for $9,000, and this is between A.W. Holmes and W. Eric Goodwin. So A.W. Holmes is actually an African-American man. He has a similar life to Bolling Morris Jr. He is born into slavery. He actually is born into slavery, and then he lives under enslavement until he's about 8 years old. And we have the end of the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation and things like that. And then he moves to Richmond. He finds a lot of success there. He founds the National Ideal Benefit Society, which is a benevolent society, very important for African Americans right after slavery, but also in the 20th century because they don't have access to healthcare insurance and things like that. So they're forming their own societies and their own banks and things like that. So A.W. Holmes has certainly found success in that. W.R. Goodwin and A.W. Holmes loan $9,000 to the Morris family, which at this point is Bolling Morris Sr., Josephine Morris, Bolling Morris Jr., and Daisy Lee Morris, who is Bolling Morris Jr.'s wife. In this 1928 deed, they sell the house along with 20 acres of land to W.R. Goodwin. So the land and the house has been sold in that transaction. And then they borrow money against the remaining land because, again, it was 521 acres in total when they purchased that in 1886. So W.R. Goodwin acquires land. He obviously transfers it to Rockefeller, who only ever intended it for trade. So it actually sits idly by for about 5 years, which is the point where I mentioned Josephine Morris asks if she can enter it in Garden Week. It's just sort of sitting there, and they know that nothing's going on with it at that point. And this is also the time where Goodwin admits that they had no real plan for the house other than just trading it. So during those 5 years, the Williamsburg Holding Corporation is taking care of it. It's technically under their control. And this photo is when it was sort of sitting in disrepair. Nothing really going on with the house at that point. Yeah, not taking care of it. So eventually the trade with the APVA is complete. So then we're in control of the house. And then later in 1931, the Morris family is unable to pay the remainder of that $9,000 loan. So the rest of their land is put up for public auction. And that's when A.W. Holmes, along with the National Ideal Benefit Society, which is his society, they purchased that land for $5,850. And then they later sell that land, which at that point is 300 acres, to Jake Jones. He is the grandfather of Gene Jones, who currently owns the land surrounding the Smiths Fort plantation. So they kept that in the family. At this point, I want to talk about Bolling Morris Jr. So Bolling Morris Jr. is the only child of Ella Morris, who was Ella E. Hardy, and Bolling Morris Sr. We're unsure of the exact dates he serves in World War I, but we know that he was drafted into World War I. He's sort of an able-bodied man at that point. And then by 1918, when the war ends, he has earned the rank of a sergeant. So that's what we know about his service there. He marries Daisy Lee Jackson in July 31st, 1918. Daisy Lee Jackson is a member of a prominent Black family in her own right. This family, the Jackson family, owns quite a bit of land. And so actually some of my research leading me to get a better understanding of Bolling Morris Jr. was actually through her and some disputes in the court about land her mother, Rashida Jackson, owned, who I believe is related to your family. Yes. So those properties are owned by her mother, so she has her own sort of vested interest in what's going on in the African American community at that point. At a certain point, they moved to Richmond. They try to find success there in a similar way that A.W. Holmes did. They moved to 210 East Clay Street. And this is actually right next to Maggie Lena Walker. So for a couple of years until Maggie Lena Walker passes in the 1930s, they actually live on the same street. So A.W. Holmes, successful African-American man, Bolling Morris Jr., and Maggie Lena Walker are all living in the same area because the National Ideal Benefit Society is also just a couple blocks away from 210 East Clay Street. And at this point, Daisy Lee Morris and Bolling Morris are running a tobacco business in Richmond. Yes, and at that point, Bolling Morris Sr. hasn't passed away yet. He's still at the house. So again, at a certain point, Bolling Morris Jr. gets a job at the post office. And this is understood to be a sort of, thank you for serving. Now you get to sit and do something inside with mail. It's a sort of thanks, a gracious job given to veterans. But in this case, it seems based off of Senate testimony and sort of a compilation of different things I was able to find in the Surry courthouse, that this actually ends up being a disadvantage for Bolling Morris Jr. So there's a couple of years in which Bolling Morris Sr. passes away. He's been sick. The land is sort of sold out from under Bolling Morris Jr., and Bolling Morris Jr. is in prison. So we believe that the cause of his imprisonment might have been a framing, just based on, again, descendant testimony and Surry courthouse documents, just because it seems that he was put into prison, federal prison, because of stealing money. But technically his job didn't really require him to face with money very much. And so it's believed that he was framed by someone as a sort of desperate attempt to finally get that land out from under the Morris family. And again, I want to harken back to the ledger books in the courthouse because, again, Bolling Morris Sr. is there the whole time. We see the purchase of the property, we see the 100 acres in the Oak Hill farm, and then he just disappears and Bolling Morris Jr. never shows up. And the sale to the National Ideal Benefit Society is not really explained very well. So it's all very muddled and suspicious there. So the odd part, I think, at least to me, is that A.W. Holmes is a part of this just because he is a successful African-American man living in the same street that Bolling Morris Jr. and his family did. You would think that they might get along, and it seems they might have at some point. But A.W. Holmes, after founding the National Ideal Benefit Society, at some point is obviously someone who gives that $9,000 loan. But then it seems that Bolling Morris Jr. gets out of prison in 1938 and he immediately sues A.W. Holmes and Jake Jones. And I'll pull up the quote here, but he is listed as a convict of the United States, now confined in federal penitentiary in something that I was looking at with Daisy Lee Morris. So I was looking at her family, and that's where I found that he was put into prison. But he claims that the sale was illegal, which is another reason we think that he might have been framed, because it's sort of an odd period in time where he's put into jail and then he's suing immediately afterwards, and his father has passed away during that time. So he claims that it shouldn't have ever been sold. It wasn't A.W. Holmes' property to sell, and he tries to get that back. It does not work out, but we know that that was sort of an example of resilience on his part, which is part of our theme for the 15th annual symposium. So we wanted to point that out. Again, after the sale, the Morris family very much cares about the property. They have that letter from Josephine trying to open it for Garden Week. And then I want to end on talking about the outdoor space. So I mentioned that they were peanut farmers. That was all four families when they lived together. They would have worked as peanut farmers, and then Bolling Morris Sr. continued that until he passed away. This is pretty common for Black laborers, but in the 1930s, we have the APVA in control of the house, and they're in the process of turning it into a museum. So they have the garden area designed and restored by the Garden Club of Virginia. And then the physical work is done by Black laborers, and that's yet another way that African Americans have been very much involved with the property. In the 1930s across Virginia, this is a pattern that's happening. We have the Norfolk Botanical Gardens. They actually have their azalea garden, and they're building that in the 1930s. They've gotten a grant from the Works Progress Administration, and that garden was actually built primarily by African American women, just because African American men have all been hired out at that point to other areas, mostly gardening in the area. So you'll see that this site is very much connected to Jamestown and to Williamsburg in more ways than one. And so the design of the garden is actually by Arthur Shercliffe, who does the designs of Colonial Williamsburg Garden at the same time. He's a very famous landscape architect. He focuses on colonial revival grounds. And then I like to end on a sort of happy note because there's a lot of sadness going on with this story. But again, back to the importance of descendant testimony, we have Morris's nephew come in and again talk to Tom Forehand and reveal that there's this tree that has since been cut down. It was cut down in the 2010s just because it was a bit of a hazard, but it had a mule ring in it, which is where Bolling Morris Sr., his uncle, would have connected Kate and Rhoda, who we know from that inventory that their names were Kate and Rhoda. They're the brown mules that were owned by Bolling Morris Sr., and he would hook them up to that walnut tree. And that's a nice little memory. When we did cut the tree down, we kept that area of the tree that has the ring in it. So if you do visit Smith's Fort, you're able to see that in the cellar. And what I love is they used the rest of the wood. They gave it to a local craftsman and actually made different plates and cutlery and little biscuit cutters out of that wood. So I've always thought that was just the coolest thing. I have a little biscuit cutter from that wood because I had to have it. And so that's a nice little note that I like to end on. So that's the end of my very long spiel on the history of the site. Thank you for listening to all of that.
So obviously, Faith's research opened so many new avenues of further research for us. So we're very pleased that we will be hosting another Woody Intern in 2025 this summer to continue this work. So we are not stopping here, and it will continue. And that's where the gentleman sitting on this panel with us kind of comes into play. Dr. Harrison, I'll let you, if you want to talk about how you're connected to the site, and just touch on what the research means to you in the community. And of course, we've got a map up here to show you all the importance of the creek to these families that we're talking about. And then touching on your own research, how it helped us.
This is a great story, but unfortunately, it's not the only story like this in Surry County, across Virginia, or across the nation. There are countless times when Black people may have acquired certain properties, particularly some of the colonial era properties, and later on, all of a sudden, they're gone. I can name at least 2 others in Surry County, Virginia, that have similar stories attached. Faith have shared a couple of things that helped me to identify not only a family interest in this with Daisy Lee Jackson Morris, who is the wife of Bolling Morris Jr. Her mother actually was the sister to my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was named Janet Harrison. He was born in 1853. And Richetta Jackson, the mother of Daisy Lee Jackson, I think was born about 1859, 57, somewhere in that era. And it is amazing to see these people and who their contemporaries would be. Just to give you a little update on that Morris family, they did move to Richmond, Virginia, and they had a very successful business in Richmond. And I have a 5th cousin, Alvin Morris Jr., who is the grandson of Bolling Morris Jr., lives now in New Jersey, and he is a retired attorney. And he is in contact with me, usually by phone, text, or email. And we have had a couple of dates to get together, but we have been unsuccessful over the last 12 months. But we're hoping to make those visits. And he doesn't remember a lot about this, but all of us have heard the stories over and over and over again. I grew up in a household. Daisy Lee Morris's first cousin was my grandfather, paternal grandfather, and I lived with my grandparents for the first few years of my life. But I can remember the stories, and I do remember them sharing stories about setups and voting, working in the post office, not being necessarily the best thing for you. But here it is, and I'm just really tickled that this work is being done. I've been doing genealogical research for the past 40 years, and I stumbled into it as a hobby. My father died in 1980, in May of 1980, actually. And I started doing genealogical research as an antidote for grief. It becomes grief therapy for me. And in the midst of this research, this genealogical research, I discovered that what I really was doing was fighting for identity. This grief therapy led me to identity. And with the absence of my father, this becomes very, very important to be connected to something. And what I wanted to be connected to was this family, this large family that I had gone to family reunions with, I went to church with, I did everything with. And my best friends growing up were family members because that's who lived next door. That's who lived 2 doors down. That's who lived 3 doors down. That's who lived behind you, and that's who lived in front of you. That was family. And in this research, I discovered late in the research, actually about a year ago, that these families basically lived along Graves Creek. They lived along Graves Creek, and as you can see, up toward the head of the creek would be John Harrison's property. The Taylor property is a great-grandfather on my paternal grandmother's side. My grandmother and grandfather paternally actually lived across the swamp from each other, and they were married. So I do know that there is traffic going across the swamp. The Jackson property, which would be Daisy Lee Morris's own place, is next door to the Taylor property. And that property borders the creek, and a lot of farm produce is moved from these farms up and down Graves Creek out to the James River and onto barges going into Norfolk, Richmond, or wherever they would be shipped. And then at the mouth of the river, rather the creek, is the Harrison Ellis property. Along the way, there would be 1, 2, 3, 4. There would be 4 siblings living along Graves Creek. That would be Obedience Harrison Ellis at Scotland at the mouth of the creek, and then Rich Etta Harrison Jackson about midway, and then John Harrison and the Taylor property at the head of the creek. And these folk related, you know, very easily with each other. There's a lot of traffic back and forth. I have letters and stories where they would have dinner together on Sundays. And the biggest day of the year for them would be the second Sunday in August, which would have been homecoming at the local church. And this was bigger than Christmas. It was bigger than Easter. It was bigger than most any holiday. And that's what I remember most about this group of families. There are a number of things that we have discovered during this period of time that these 4 Black men would have purchased this property. And incidentally, I just discovered that Ida Carter would have been the sister to my, on my maternal side, the sister to my great-great-grandfather. And I didn't realize that before you recited those names. And so I have an interest in this on both sides, maternal side and paternal side. And the names that have been a part of my research, and if any of you might have an interest in some of these names, would be Harrison, Ellis, Jackson, Bingham, B-I-N-G-H-A-M, Morris, Howell, Debrick, and the Debrick is actually spelled D-E-B-R-I-C-K, or you might find it D-E-B-R-I-X. And there are some other names, but these are just some of those that I've done quite a bit of research with. It's interesting, along the way, doing genealogical research, I'm finding things like Surry County and James City County had the largest of Black populations among the counties in the state of Virginia between 1830 and 1860. Surry County and James City County had the largest free Black populations among the counties in the state. And that's kind of interesting because I was involved in rehabbing what we thought was a Rosenwald school in Smithfield, Virginia, but actually it was constructed as the addition to a Rosenwald school. And in rehabbing that addition, we found out that there were no Rosenwald schools in Surry County. Well, I'm wondering why. You can only theorize why. Well, part of the issue was Surry County had a lot of Black landowners. They were able to put up land and construct their own schools. And so they did not necessarily need the assistance from the Rosenwald Fund. And you're discovering little things like this along the way. The other thing that I ran across, we were able to find manumission certificates in the circuit courthouse at Surry. There were some actual real manumission certificates, and we are finding a lot of the people that we are researching, we're finding their manumission certificates. And the family that Ida Carter comes from, which is Holmes, Holmes, were a family of free people. My grandfather, maternal grandfather, Robert Holmes, when I was about 13 years old, said to me that his people were free. And I looked at him and I thought to myself, you wouldn't dare say it. But granted that you don't know what you're talking about. You know, all Black people were slaves. Well, that's all I'd ever been exposed to in school. And little did I know, I did find out that Granddaddy knew what he was talking about. And the older I get and the more research I do, the smarter he gets. It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, he is just brilliant about right now. And so I was able to prove what he said. I've been able to find the names of some enslavers. This group of siblings who lived along Grace Creek were actually slaves on what is now called Pipsico Plantation. The Boy Scouts of America actually owns it in Surry County, Virginia. And it's just above the head of the creek on the James River. And you can actually see that property from Charles City County, actually. It is quite interesting that you have the movement of people who are freed in 1863, and very quickly do they become landowners and participating as full-fledged citizens in Surry County, Virginia. They're participating in everything that anybody else is participating in, and some segregated opportunities. But what amazes me most about this is that they very quickly recognize three things that are very, very important in the households and to the present day. That was land ownership, education, and religion. Those three things became the driving forces in these homes. And so they moved from enslavement to becoming landowners as early as the 1870s. And that's very quick. And it actually surprised me that they could make these opportunities happen for themselves as early as the 1870s. I actually live on a piece of property that has been in the family since 1880s. And if you drive down to the Jamestown Scotland Ferry and look straight across the river, you're looking at the mouth of Grace Creek. And the property to the left of that mouth is where I live, and it has been in the family a very, very long time. And we are very proud to have held it this long, although how long we're going to be able to hold it, but at any rate, we've got it now. But it's a testament to our ancestors. Dr. Joy James, some of you may be familiar with her writings, but she has said that I didn't know my ancestors, but I can honor them. I did not know them, but I can honor them. And one of the things that we are driven to do, we want to honor those ancestors for their work and for the witness that they left with us in preservation of land, preservation of reputation, preservation of work ethic, and the whole gamut. The other thing that is discovered in doing this genealogical work is the development of a college in Surry County, Virginia. Some of you may know of John Jefferson Smallwood, who was actually the grandson of Nat Turner. John Jefferson Smallwood established a college at Claremont, Virginia, and during the same time period that this Morris property is sold in the late 20s, early 30s, that school failed. And the Marcus Garvey movement actually purchased the property in Surry County, Virginia. And their idea and thought was it had a deep water harbor. They would launch the program of taking Black Americans to Liberia. And it would happen from that property in Surry County, Virginia. But Smallwood Institute operated as a college, and I've had an opportunity to interview some of the former students of that college who were members of my own family, and they would have been in their 80s when I interviewed them. The college was built or styled after Tuskegee in Tuskegee, Alabama. And what that means is that it would have an industry, it would have an academic offering, and there would be a farm. Those three things existed on these colleges and that were established during that time period. And one of course was in Surry. And there are a lot of agribusinesses that were present, and there would be sawmills and the like, and farms that would support families. But at this time, we're going to take some questions.
Yes, we could all listen to Dr. Harrison forever. We do want to take questions, and I just wanted to sort of wrap up our more formal end of the presentation by saying, as I said before, that this doesn't stop today. It doesn't stop with Faith's internship. The research keeps going, and stay tuned and listen in. As the museum person here, I hope to see our interpretation shift at the site to really focus on these families. I think, like the theme is today, that is resilience. I see the fact that this story was sort of suppressed by our organization for so many years, but it keeps coming back, right? Because you can't ignore this. It's such a compelling and important story, and as Faith's always reminding us that Black history is American history. And so I give that to Faith, always reminding us and the staff to keep that in our forefront of our minds. But do stay tuned to our work there. And Dr. Harrison is not getting away from us either. So, and hopefully we'll be starting to connect with the Morris family descendants as time goes on. It's a marathon for sure. It's never a sprint, this kind of work. So I guess unless either of you have anything to say, we'll ask for questions now.
Yep, so I'm going to be sending the mic around, so raise your hand for questions, and then I'll bring the mic back up to the panelists so the Zoom participants can be apprised of what we're talking about. So questions?
First, thank you for your work. I'm fascinated by the garden movement, that property in Surry. I grew up not too far from here. I have a couple of questions. Number one for you, sir. How long did they own that property or had control of that property? And did you get pushback? Or what was the pushback? Actually, let me say that. What was the pushback from your organization when you tried to, change this story?
You want to answer the pushback?
Okay. At Preservation Virginia, zero pushback now. Everyone is totally and completely on board with this work. I will say, if we had a time machine and we went back, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years in this organization, different story. I've been working here over 2.5 years now. And it is a overwhelming movement across the board at all of our historic sites is to elevate these histories, which for so long have not been highlighted or anything. So we had a panel presentation yesterday that Dr. Harrison was on. He was one of our organization's African American fellows this past summer. So we have fellowships with our organization to try and fund research and projects across the state, not even related to our sites. So no pushback now. Again, if we had a time machine, different story probably.
One piece of that. Do you remember back as we approached 2007, when we would have been celebrating the 400th anniversary of the founding of Jamestown? I think that event actually changed a lot about how we do history and history presentations and reflections and so forth. That really was the first time, I think, that we did an all-out assault on the way we do history. And that event across the state of Virginia, according to Virginia Tourism, took on the lens of 3 different cultures. That's new. Native or First Peoples culture, Black American culture, and Euro-American culture. And all of a sudden, it becomes very, very important to report what is seen through all of the lenses instead of just one of the lenses. Now, how long the property was owned?
But the Garvey, you mentioned the Garvey.
Oh, no, they didn't own it very long. That was not a successful venture as we moved on, and it ends up in courts in Surry County, and there's a lot of litigation that goes back and forth. Yeah. But it's an interesting piece.
Other questions?
I think I have 2 questions if I can remember them. First is Dr. Carroll. I haven't read that poster, but how is she tied in with what you're doing? Or is there any significance?
Early, yeah.
Oh, that's from earlier. Okay. All right. So the second question: what did you call this? The Woody
internship?
Okay. So is that going to be somewhat, hopefully, like the Lemon Project? Same type of situation?
Are you asking if the Lemon Project could instate a Woody internship?
No.
Oh, okay, so the Woody internship is from the Woodies. They're a couple who were always interested in museum studies. They weren't able to really study that during their time as undergraduates, and so they actually fund that with the Charles Center, which is under William and Mary. And so we actually just did our orientation for the next batch of Charles Center interns, which includes the Woody interns. So it's the Woody Internship in Museum Studies. They partner with several different museums around the country, many of them in Virginia, and they accept certain students and then pair them up with different museums. So based on the interest I expressed in African American history, I was paired with Preservation of Virginia. So the Woody internship is not directly connected to the Lemon Project. It's just under the Charles
I
Center.
didn't think that they were. I just meant, would you become something similar to the Lemon Project? Is that your hope?
Well, so the way the Woody internship works is basically William and Mary came to our organization, Preservation Virginia, and said, can we provide a funded intern for you? Because our organization is a medium-sized nonprofit. And we have a small staff for the mighty work that we do. And yes, I will always take a funded intern is the answer. And the caliber of students that we've gotten from William and Mary kind of blows me away, Faith especially. So having that partnership, I don't have the bandwidth or the time or the funding to bring in internships like this. So being able to partner with William and Mary is huge for our organization. and they're with what, 7 or 8 other museums around Virginia. So it's an amazing opportunity for us, and then give students like Faith such like hands-on, you know, work experience, and I think enjoyed it along the way.
I have 2 questions for Faith, and I'm gonna embarrass Faith a little bit too. So Faith, the first question is, what's the most surprising thing that you found in your research on this site? And then the second question is, I'd like you to tell, because y'all, Faith is amazing.
Yes.
So I would like Faith to tell you about her current honors thesis work. She's a rising star. She's already a star, but she's marvelous. So I just wanted to brag on Faith a little bit.
In Surrey, she's a big star. Superstar.
As far as surprises, I just hadn't done research in this mode before. I'd enjoyed doing research for final essays in different classes and things like that, certainly, which is actually what led to my thesis. But I think it was a lot of learning. And so maybe not necessarily surprising, but definitely new things for me. I think a surprise is just what I found. I was expecting to sort of be let down in terms of wanting to know more about their personal lives. It was something I inevitably wanted and was going to look for, but I wasn't even sure where I could possibly gain that knowledge. So I definitely wasn't surprised there to not find that. But as far as the other very exciting details of the story, I definitely wasn't expecting to find those. I wanted to get as much as possible, but I was kind of thinking it would be like general steps. Certainly some disenfranchisement of the African American families. I expected that for sure, but the the suing between the Hardys and the Morris family, and Roberts and Simmons sort of dropping off, and Rutherford Goodwin chasing Bolling Morris Sr. through the fields and things like that. I certainly was surprised to find that. And I think that a lot of that research was found like in one day in the Rockefeller Library. So that was like a very big research day. I would say that was like the most exciting day. As far as my thesis, this is Dr. Petty, who's my thesis advisor, which is why she knows so much about my thesis. It's definitely in the same period of history as this, but I'm looking at American Girl, Addie Walker, who's American Girl's first African-American girl doll. She's released in 1993. And just looking at what was done well there in terms of that interpretation, looking at her not only under slavery, but in the Reconstruction era where she is living in Philadelphia with her mother after having self-emancipated from slavery, looking at the food history that was done there, looking at the advisory board that's full of incredible people who are very successful in African American history and in the museum field, who were advisors to Pleasant Rowland and to the American Girl Company in creating that doll, and how she has impacted many lives, and something I call the American Girl to Museum professional pipeline, just because I've talked to so many people who have some connection, and I bring up my thesis and they go, oh, I loved American Girl and now I'm a curator or I'm a librarian or something and working in museums. And so the American Girl and other historical fiction was very important to me in building my own love of history. And so my passion is sort of reflected in that thesis. So I hope I did your question justice.
Stories.
Yeah.
Interviewing people. That's the only reason I embarrassed you.
I also want to touch back on the fact that I would say that everything that we found this summer was there. It was in the archives. It was in Surry County records. Surry County is one of the few non-burned counties. They did not send their records to Richmond, thank goodness. And so they survived back to the 17th century, which is remarkable. But the day we spent in the Rockefeller Library, we had to get permission from Colonial Williamsburg's lawyers to look at these documents because they involved purchasing information. And the librarians and the archivists there were really fantastic to work with. We had to try several different names to find the right file. I think it ended up being under Warren Rolfe House because this home has had so many names over the years. But I think we sat there and we flipped paper by paper and kept looking at the papers and, making faces at each other because we couldn't scream out loud in the library. And then when we found those photos, it really brought this place to life for us. And that is, a curator and historian's dream is to have photos of interiors. And we now that's probably the best look into how we know they lived in that house. Also, I love that we have the mules' names, Kate and Rhoda.
Wanted to make a comment. I really enjoyed this panel. I really enjoyed this panel. And I wanted to say that it's been maybe 10 years or so that my husband and I and another Black couple, we live in Williamsburg, and we came over to Smith Fort and did a tour, and also Bacon's Castle, but we had this kind of information on a tour, it would have been a lot better place. It was, I'm into history, but it was a little boring, frankly. And bland, we even walked down to the water to see that, but to have the information, I mean, nobody said this house had been owned by 4 Black folks back in, in the time that it was, and it would have been a whole different interpretation of that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to say, I grew up with your cousin Alvin Morris in Richmond, so anyway, we'll talk later.
Thank you. Time for one more after.
I do want to say that we do have 3 more tours coming up, so it'll be the last Saturdays in March, April, and May, and we're changing the time to 10 a.m. So next Saturday, the 29th, and then I think it's the 26th and the 31st. If anyone does want to join us at Smith's Fort, it is a free tour. We just ask that you reserve your spot, and I'm happy to share all of the information.
Yeah, and you'll start to find that, I can't go in and say to our staff, I've written a new tour and you're going to say this, right? It is a long and ongoing process. And so they're gradually bringing more and more of this into the story. But that's why we are having Faith give Black history tours, specifically focused on this information every month since then. And then I think in the next 1 to 2 years, you'll see our interpretation really almost heavily focused on this because like you said, it's an amazing story.
Well, why was it necessary to go through the lawyers to see the financial?
It was mainly because there was land acquisition documents in it. I don't think the Colonial Williams was trying to hide any of this information. In fact, everybody there, I worked so closely with many different facets of the staff there. And they are grateful and thankful and very interested that we're doing this work to uncover this. So it wasn't necessarily that the Rockefeller Library was trying to hide it, but it was just merely because of legal documents being in that. And I would imagine that most institutions of that size with that kind of a background of land acquisition, the legal things are what is why it was protected. But there was no pushback. Once we submitted our request, they said, yep, you can see it. And they also scanned any document we wanted to see. So yeah, we have a big old PDF.
We actually have time for one more bonus question if anybody had.
In the Black.
You got one.
Okay.
Any last thoughts, comments, questions?
I was always curious. Curious is not the right word, but for the dream that WR yes had about his vision, which appears that wasn't a dream, it was a well-planned intention. even with the restoration of Williamsburg and what you're telling of the story, it seems like it was a real setup, like, we want this. We're going to get this. We're going to set up a plan to get it. But I do thank you for your research. I've been trying to get to Surry. I grew up in Williamsburg, had never been to Surry, but never. I started one day, was gonna get the free ferry, drove there, got nervous, too afraid to get on this free ferry ride. And I think one time the ferry must have it never had a problem, but somehow the ferry stopped in the middle. But I am going to get to Surry, so hopefully I can get on time. Thank you for your research.
Wonderful. Let's give one more round of applause for
You were good. You did good.
I just wanted to quickly say, I hope to see a lot of you tonight at Hart Memorial to the Enslaved. We're having a big celebration, celebrate 15 years of the Limit Project. It starts at 7 o'clock. We're planning on having a fire in the vessel. So come, share, we hope to see all you there. Thank you very much.
But I live in Virginia now.